Welcome to the Mime Radio Show. I'm Karen Hoyer.
And I'm James Donlin. Here we are, season 4, Karen.
Yep.
Amazing. I was looking at the archive. I think we've done 32. This is maybe our 33rd interview in less than 2 years.
Oh, yeah, we're doing great work. Thanks to Michael Diaz.
That's right, Michael Diaz. As I always say, if I was to move this image over there, we'd see him behind there.
Yeah, just peek around the corner.
Working with us, and he can turn us off at any time, but
so we better behave, right, James?
That's right. Thanks to him, we have a very professional and a very supportive team behind us.
So who's our guest today?
Today's guest is someone I've known for almost 50 years. And let me read something about him. I'll put my anteojos on, because one's getting older these days. Daniel Stein, ladies and gentlemen. Daniel Stein is one of the world's most celebrated mimes over the last 50 years. Currently, he teaches movement for the actor and devising original works at University of California, Santa Barbara. After studying in the Professional Actors Training Program at Carnegie Mellon University, Daniel went to Paris to study with Etienne Decroux, becoming Monsieur Decroux's frequent translator. Subsequently, making his home in Paris for 20 years, Daniel started his professional career as an actor with the French National Theatre. His solo performances have toured in more than 30 countries, as well as USA theaters such as the Kennedy Center and Lincoln Center. He has performed and taught master classes throughout the world at institutions such as the Juilliard School of Drama and the Shanghai Theatre Academy. Daniel spent 7 years at Brown University as head of movement and physical theater for the MFA Professional Actor Training Program, and over a decade at Del Arte International School of Physical Theater in Blue Lake, California, serving as school director and core instructor. So let's welcome in Daniel Stein.
That would be me. I'll take my glasses off for a second so you can see my eyes. But I'm outside, and if I want to see you folks, I'm going to keep them on for a little bit.
Well, hello, Daniel. Welcome.
Tell us where you are. It's a sunny spot. Both Karen and I are in the basements. I'm in Oregon. She's in Chicago. So where are you?
I am in Santa Barbara, which has been my home now for 7 years, and I'm in my backyard on my deck. I can see both my cats because they're sitting in the kitchen window watching this whole thing happen. And this is Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is, if you had to pick a place in the world to live, I would put this on one of the top shelves.
Yeah, well, I lived there for almost 30 years, and there was a saying that people would comment about with tongue in cheek. They would say, another shitty day in paradise. I don't know if that's still the case there, but it is a beautiful place.
Yeah, it looks lovely.
And no shitty days.
Yeah. So Daniel, you've had an amazing career as a performer and as a teacher, and both of those professions require a certain amount of preparation, like right before you go in front of an audience or in front of your students. I'm really curious about what you do to prepare. When you think back to all the different performances and all the different places where you performed, how did you get ready? And what was the thought that you had right before you went on stage?
Two different questions. The first one is I rehearsed a little bit like an insane human being. I still am a perfectionist when it comes to some things, and I'm a total slob when it comes to other things. When it comes to my performance work, I was always trying to get an edge on how articulate I could be without making it look machine-like. As for the last thing that was in my thoughts before I stepped on stage. This goes all the way back to like 1985, where I was already in the middle of my career, but I met a woman in Tokyo. She was a dear friend of mine, David Mura, who is a Japanese American author. And she taught me self-hypnosis. She was a doctor, and she taught me self-hypnosis. So before I go into a classroom or onto stage these days, ever since 1985, which is not that I guess that's a little long ago for some people, and it seems like yesterday for me. I do like a 2-minute auto hypnosis to just bring to make the chatter that I think we all live with. It doesn't disappear, but I can turn the volume down of the chatter and really give myself to the theater. You know, theater is I think I learned this from Jewel Walker, or at least he was part of it. I've always been surrounded by teachers who were so adoring of the theater. The theater was this thing to be revered, and I caught that bug. And so, you know, this scarf that I have, the theater gave it to me. My shirt, the theater gave it to me because I work in the theater, and it gives me what I need to live. And so I think about, I do my meditation, I come back out of it, and I think, let's do some magic. You know?
Do you want to have a sense of calm or a sense of excitement when you go out? How do you prepare yourself to be revved up or super calm?
I think on the razor's edge between falling into one or the other. I think decrees say that any decision made solely with the mind should be revisited with the heart, and any decision made solely with the heart should probably be revisited with the mind. And so that balance, to find where that balance is between that spontaneity and excitement and that mind of the beginner, which is that of the calm. I guess that's where I would like to be. I don't think I've perfected that by any stretch of the imagination, but that's certainly where I would like to be.
It's interesting, Daniel. You mentioned a friend in Japan, and looking at your performances over the years, there's such a acute sense of design and precision in a lot of the visuals, you know, whether it's with props or just the crew system that you've adapted, which we'll talk about later. But I'm thinking Japanese culture may have been a great influence on you, or not. If not influence, it was something that fit with your aesthetic that you learned from. But tell us about, you said that the theater became your world, and it gave you what you are. What happened before that? Let's say before you went to Carnegie Mellon, like how were you as a kid? Were you always precise as a kid? Were you, what was going on? And I guess, were you born and raised in Milwaukee or Wisconsin? Yeah.
Milwaukee. So I'm highly dyslexic. I didn't learn to read until I was 12 years old. And
wow.
So I spent my first 17 years failing at absolutely everything. I had a stomach ache from about 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon until about 5 p.m. Friday afternoon. I had a stomach ache because I knew that the only thing in front of me for all of that period of time was school. And school for me was a total checkmate on a constant level. And so and I think I'm actually a performer today, not in spite of being dyslexic, but thanks to being dyslexic. I was always finding a workaround because I couldn't do it the way everybody else was doing it, but I knew that I needed somehow to get to the finish line or whatever the assignment was. And I was constantly working on a workaround, but it made me like I was always hacking. Before hacking was invented, I was hacking the system. I wasn't hacking computers because I didn't know anything about them, but I was hacking the system. And I was a horrible example of a child. I think I was not successful at being a kid at all. I had a lot of fun, but
did you do performing when you were a child or in high school?
Already, yeah. In 8th grade is when I got the bug, because my 8th grade reading teacher, Miss Hoffman, excuse me, Miss Hoffman never got married. What an amazing woman. Oh my God, I owe so much to her. She looked at me. Nobody knew what to do with me because I was failing at everything. When I say that, I don't say that proudly. It was a horrible time. And she looked at me one day and said, you should audition for a play. And I was like, okay. I mean, because I was already interested in the theater. But I didn't ever think that I could do that. I didn't think I could do anything. I woke up every morning and went to bed every night with the thought, I'm going to bag groceries the rest of my life and disappoint everyone in my life.
Where did the physical side come from? I mean, you have a great athletic body. I played basketball for decades, was a pretty elite player, but your body is very conducive to athletics. So in spite of the dyslexia and this trauma that you were living, where did this physical sense come from that allowed you to go into physical theater? I mean, how was that generated, in this life?
That was generated by Jewel Walker and the Mr. Rogers Show. When I was a little kid, I used to watch, I was addicted to Fred Rogers because he was a compassionate person, and his compassion drew me in because I was not getting a lot of compassion. I was, in the light of everybody around me, I was stupid and lazy. And that's a hard thing to deal with. It's very funny because at a certain point they gave me an IQ test and I tested rather high. And so they decided I wasn't stupid, so I must be extremely lazy. and it was like you couldn't win. But in any event, I used to watch Fred Rogers, and his guest frequently was Mime Walker. And Mime Walker would be on the show and he would do his little things. And this, of course, was before video existed. So you couldn't tape record this thing. You had to watch it in live time. And I wouldn't, I couldn't leave the show until it was over because I had to hear him sing his song and hang up his cardigan. But then I would zoom upstairs to the back of my mother's closet. There was a mirror. And I would teach myself everything that Mime Walker had just done on the Mr. Rogers Show.
And that was Jewel Walker?
That was Jewel Walker in Pittsburgh, because that's where the show was produced.
They called it Mime Walker. That's interesting.
Mime Walker,
I didn't
exactly.
know that.
I didn't realize
Walker
was he teaching at Carnegie Mellon when you went?
He was teaching at Carnegie Mellon. So fast forward about 9 years, about 8 years. I auditioned for the summer program at Carnegie Mellon. I got into it. I went to Carnegie Mellon, having no idea who I would see there. And fucking Jewel Walker is the head of the acting department at Carnegie Mellon and my teacher. And it was like I had fallen at the feet of Buddha. It was mind-boggling that this man was now going to be my teacher. And he passed away only 2 years ago. But he and I stayed connected from the time that I was 16, 17 until I was 68 and he was 92.
Yeah, I'm sorry we missed him because he would have been a great guest on the Mime Radio show.
Oh yeah, it would
It
have been.
sounds like he was very influential. But tell me, his style is not the crew, right? I mean, what was the attraction to head to Paris to study a system that I think is probably somewhat different than Jewel Walker, correct?
Well, let's go back in history a little bit. Decroux taught Marcel Marceau pantomime.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so pantomime was the thing back in those days. And then a little bit further down the line, Decroux decided that pantomime was, he used to say, il y a assez de vrais murs dans la vie. There are enough real walls in life that that we don't need to spend our time as artists creating artificial walls, that we need to get rid of those and do something other. So pantomime, if you will, is if I have a glass, it's a positive mold. If I take my hand and put it around the glass and then remove the glass, I now have the negative mold of the glass, and I manipulate the negative mold, and people then follow a story of objects that are not there.
Right.
Decroux, when he shifted, and this will get back to Jewel Walker, I promise, when Decroux shifted away from pantomime and towards what he called corporeal mime, all of a sudden, the things in the world became much less important and the ideas in the world became much more important. So yesterday, for example, I was talking to some students who asked me this exact same question about mime and pantomime. And I said, so if I fell over, I could do a performance of falling over and it would look like me falling over. I could also, however, do something like this. Oh, fuck, this is gonna hurt. And that's corporeal mime, because we're still at the intersection of movement and human being, but we are not imitating it. We are giving a perpendicularity to it. Mm-hmm. So because the thing that ended up driving me crazy about pantomime was that everything was inauthentic. It seemed as if I had a glass, but I didn't have a glass. I could always have a concrete idea.
Let's stop there for a minute. So how do you explain Marceau's work? Because he shifted away from Decroux and he did use object illusions, but yet there's something else. I don't think he's remembered for his object illusions in the end. I mean, in the beginning, walking against the wind and leaning against the mantelpiece and pulling the rope and all those things got him attention, but it seemed like his legacy is more about the heart. So I'm just wondering, how would you explain, where would Marceau fit? Would that be a little of corporeal mime and pantomime in your definition? How would you explain that?
I would explain that by saying that any artist ultimately has a delivery system, which is their craft, and a core, which is their poetic being. I mean, your poetic being, I know you as somebody who did a lot of mask work, but I wasn't watching the mask. I was watching James Donlan's heart on stage. Mm-hmm. Expressing itself through mask. Mm-hmm. And watch Marceau expressing his heart through a technique, and hopefully, what I was doing was my heart through the lens of Decroux's radical change in direction of energy. He went from that technique to create an entirely new technique, and Jewel Walker happened to be one of his students. So Jewel was a student of de Cruz, and I heard about de Cruz from Jewel. And then I ended up studying with de Cruz, but that's an entirely different story. I was actually on my way to go to Poland to be a pantomime at the same summer that I went to study with de Cruz and leave Carnegie Mellon. I was supposed to go to Poland and become Tomaszewski's premier mime. And because
be in his company? What do you mean be his premier? To be
he ran the Polish Mime Theater,
right,
in Warsaw. But this is 1973, and so the Berlin Wall still exists, and Americans couldn't go to that part of the world without visas. And so he came to Carnegie Mellon. He saw me. He invited me to come. He was very excited. He said, "You take a year off and you work for me. And then if you love it, you stay." And because at that time I was already a pretty good pantomime. And I'll make this story incredibly short. Because of the mail, I sent him letters asking him for visas. He sent me letters with visas, but they didn't come to me. They went to my ballet teacher, who spoke Polish, because she was the person who invited him to Pittsburgh. And he wrote me the first letter, "Here's your visa." Second letter, "Here's your second visa. I don't know why you didn't get the first letter." Third letter is, "I'm going to have to give your job to someone else if you don't get here soon." Fourth letter is, "I thought we had a deal. Are all Americans assholes?" And so I go to Jewel with these because I didn't hear anything. So I went to Jewel and said, "What the fuck am I supposed to do?" He never wrote back to me. I can't go to Poland anymore because I don't have a visa. I already have a bargain with the university set up to take a year's leave of absence. What do I do? And without hesitation, he said, "Well, you go study with de Cruz in Paris." and I went, well, if Jewel Walker told me to jump, I would ask him, "When can I come down?" Because that's the kind of influence the man had on me.
It's this amazing things that happen in people's career where there's like some accidental thing that puts them in a certain direction that brings you to de Cruz and learning his technique. I just want to put in here, just going back a little bit when we were talking about Marceau and de Cruz, it has also to do with the fact that there's technique, but you can't perform technique. And sometimes this is very often true with people who see Marceau and they copy the technique, but they don't have the ideas and the soul and the sort of abstract ideas. And that is very often true with people who study de Cruz technique, which is so complex that pretty soon it's like I mastered the technique, but I've lost my creativity. So how do we meld that technique?
A little bit like
creativity?
Driving a highly tuned race car, but you don't have they call it car racing a sport. And I've always wondered about that because you have all this technology. But so the movement system is this highly tuned race car. But if you don't have the guts or the heart or the drive, the stamina to be in that car driving, then, it's just like Karen's saying, it's just the performance of a system rather than that other extra element, correct? Yeah.
So de Cruz used to describe a glass staircase. And so you'd imagine this glass staircase that is perfectly articulate, and then you're standing under the staircase and it's above you. And imagine water now pummeling down the staircase. The water would be entirely loose, and yet it would fit and conform perfectly to, it wouldn't miss a centimeter of the articulate stair. And that somehow you had to create a hybrid of those two things simultaneously, so that your it's a little bit. I love your analogy of racing cars. I happened to watch last night the Formula One race from Australia that took place on Sunday, but I didn't get to it until yesterday. And it's exactly that. It's exactly that. You're at the will of the car, and yet the car is at the will of you. Because if the car's going 200 miles an hour, and so it's got a lot of will at that point. And if you don't do your job, its will take over, at which point you're in big trouble. And vice versa, if you don't have the chutzpah to get in it and really push the pedal, you're wasting this remarkable vehicle because you're toddling along at 25 miles an hour, so you can make sure you see everything.
So this is what is a mystery to me with you is you're very smart, you're very intellectual, you're very articulate, and yet physical theater is that there's this primal physical. I just use the word physical, but there's this primal blood and guts and energy and muscles that brings the mind to the forefront. So I'm still not understanding exactly where that physicality in you came, because you are very physical, and we're talking on this intellectual plane, and you're telling me about a childhood which was very challenging. I don't imagine that you played on sports teams or anything like that. So where does this physical energy come from, and how, or not exactly where it came from, but how did it grab you? And then you went into this wonderful career as a mime, where the body and energy is the basis for the mind,
Without being vulgar.
Why not?
Well, do you remember the first time you masturbated? I do.
Oh, yeah.
Me too.
Okay, I do too. Yeah.
At that moment, my body spoke to me and went, that's part of me? That what just happened came out of this being? Where the fuck was that? And what was that? And how on earth? How do I live with that? And I'm and have been an extraordinarily sexual human being my whole life, ever since that moment. And that animal, because I think it's animal. Mother Nature gave us two things: the desire to survive and the desire to procreate. And those two things are what the animal is. And we happen to be a slightly more elevated animal in terms of being conscious of the fact that we're conscious. But the animal comes from that deep survival instinct, which I was steeped in because I wasn't going to let these fuckers get beyond me, even if I'm dyslexic. And then I discovered that my body had all of this magic in me. And it became furiously, I felt like a horse in a tiny barn. I had to get out of it there and gallop. And it became physical theater.
Why did you? It's beautiful.
That sort of energy everyone feels, that those moments of abandon that in our culture is almost always squashed. Almost always, if you feel abandoned to dance like crazy, people are going to say, "No, not here, not here. Don't do that now." And that kind of energy is can be useful in our creative process.
So you stayed in Europe for 20 years, and this discussion we just had explains maybe why you did that. Because for me, Europe is a much more sexual, a much more hedonistic place and yet with a very intellectual umbrella over that, that Europeans make good choices very often. So except for war, because there's a lot of war there, but maybe that's the animal that gets out of control, right? At some point, they break through. But so you stayed in Paris for 20 years, and why? And then you came back. So why did you stay there, and why did you come back?
I stayed there. It goes back to the dyslexia. I stayed there because I didn't speak a word of French when I got to Paris. I didn't know how to say bonjour, hello. I didn't know anything. And I just failed Spanish as a freshman in high school, and then as a sophomore in high school. Failed it, not D. I failed it. So I went to Paris assuming that I had to learn French. Mm-hmm. And I was a driven human being. I learned French, and you learn French. I learned French quite quickly. It took me about 3 months to start really talking with people. And in 6 months, I was translating for Decroux. And all of a sudden, this dyslexic, stupid, lazy human being that I still go to sleep with every night and wake up with every night was functioning at a rather high level in a different language. And every time I opened my fucking mouth, my ego, and heaven knows, I have an ego as big as the mountains behind me, got stroked. Mm-hmm. And so for 20 years, I was living this life in French, and it was like a fucking movie. I'm the star of this movie. So, why not? And and plus the fact it was so much easier to tour internationally from Paris because you're in the middle of it instead of at the far, far edge of it. The only reason I came back is because my first wife, who I was married with for 21 years, she had a boy. She had a 6-year-old when I met her. And Anthony Sandoval, who's now the director of acting at Tulane University, is my son. And he went to graduate school with Jewel Walker because he wanted to be an actor, and I sent him to who I knew was the best. And when he graduated, he wanted to live in the States. And so his mother said, we have to move to the States. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And she was an artist. She was a sculptor. She is now deceased, unfortunately.
I took at the same time that I took a class with you here in Oak Park, I took a mask making class that was phenomenal.
Yes, she was an amazing artist.
And she created some masks for you too, right?
I got all of my masks. Yeah. She made all of my masks. And
Paul Stein, right?
Paul, Paule, Paul.
Right.
And she was probably the most remarkable artist I've ever met, because she too is not. It's so funny that, James, you refer to me as intellectual. I'm not. I really am not, because I'm not. Anyway, she was not either. We were both very in the mud kind of artists in terms of how we created the work. But I want to go back to something Karen said earlier about the things in our careers that lead to things, our accidents, the things that turn into the best things in our art are always the accidents that happen in the rehearsal room where you go, fuck, that's not, I can use that. Mm-hmm. It's as you're falling over that you say, I gotta figure this out because I need to use this. Mm-hmm. And so those accidents are not, I think that we think we're supposed to push those to the side. And in fact, those are the things that we need to see, hone, polish, and then present. And the audience looks at it and goes, where did that come from? Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Playing
yeah,
in
and
the
those are the
studio,
moments that they'll remember too.
playing in
And
the
the that I've had that happen to me too. That it's like an accident, like, and then when you're going to create a new piece, you're just like, how did I do it last time? I don't remember how it happened, but it happened because of those accidents.
Well, you create the terrain where those accidents not only are permitted, but they are enticed to come into the room. And if you're really doing your work, you're in there watching everything that happens, everything, so that even out of the corner of your eye, I mean, one of the mask pieces that actually got me sort of known, because I did it on television in a lot of different countries, was a double mask piece that was a timepiece. That was an entire accident. I asked my wife to make me a double mask, and I assumed that it would be a double mask the way I'd always seen a double mask with some kind of elastic in between the two masks. Well, she put the two masks in this hood, and all of a sudden I was invisible, and the masks were on both sides, and I couldn't be seen. And my ego said, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you hiding me? And she said, Daniel, I don't have time to fuck with you right now. I have Rudolf Nureyev who wants his masks. If they really don't work, we can talk about it. So I'm in the studio sitting on the floor, angry that my masks, and at this point, they were on the side of my head because I was not working with them. I was breathing, but I was sitting on the floor. But I'm in front of a mirror. And I could sort of see through this material. As I turned my head, I saw this guy. And then I went like this and saw this guy and went, fuck, I can use this. It was a total accident. It was a total accident on her genius and my stupidity, or my lack of patience.
Yeah.
And the fact
I have a question. So just stop a second. So I've seen this piece is a fantastic piece. I've seen it, I saw it first years and years and years ago. It's the the combatant, and you have some great photos. I hope we can put them on the website. But this word devised, which tends to be even in your title at UCSB, this word devised troubles me, because in my mind, all theater is devised. We're just talking about playing in the studio and seeing something that magically comes. But, even Shakespeare was devised at some point, somebody had to. So it's really, we're talking about creation. And so the physical theater is the actor, creator, director very often, that's the role of the physical theater artist. But what's your feeling about this word, which is a fad now? I mean, it's a total devised theater is a big thing. But when I started and you started 40, 50 years ago, that's what we did. That's why we're known for what we do, because we devised work. So
James, they're just finally catching up to us. That's what it is.
Maybe that's it. But what's Daniel, this idle devised theater?
So when I was a kid, my father used to say to me, you can choose to do something, you can choose not to do something, you cannot choose if you're responsible. You are responsible. You're responsible if you decide to do it, and you are responsible if you decide not to do it. And De Croo was all about responsibility. And he said, there are people who stand doing what people who are sitting are telling them to do. And that is not okay. That people who are standing are not better than people who are sitting, and people who are sitting are not better than people who are standing, but they are radically different. And it's so interesting because responsibility, if I could write it out for you, I have a what teaching spaces, I would write respond stability. Mm-hmm. So that responsibility is the ability to respond. And not. And Shakespeare's brilliant and Moliere is brilliant. When I walk into the room to interpret their work, I already have the foundation of a genius in my corner.
Mm-hmm.
When we walk into the studio with nothing, you don't have that genius in your corner. And okay, asshole, what are you going to do? And that is, it's horrifying. I'm sure you remember the first time you walked into a studio and looked in the mirror. Well, what the fuck am I supposed to do?
I think that magic, some of us have that magic and we welcome that. I mean, you welcome it. I mean, I don't think I've ever had that feeling of what the hell am I doing? I just start playing, So, I mean, I of course I've had, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to respond. This responsibility is a great way to think about this.
But when you walk into the theater, when you walk into the studio space and you want to create something, that sort of courage to keep going. I think maybe you as a teacher, Daniel, is like, how do you give your students the gift of courage to just face the blank studio, the empty studio, and pull it out of themselves somehow?
You give them when you walk into the studio and absolutely anything is possible, you drown in that freedom. And if you offer yourself a constraint, like a technique, you have something to push against. So one of the things all of my students puppet back to me is something that I say all the time. If it's true in the physical world, it's probably also true in the metaphysical world. That the physical world, the world of things, have rules. And if I take my notebook and I take the support out from under my notebook, I have an idea and I pull the support out from under that idea too will fall to the ground. So we have the physical world, the metaphysical world. In the physical world, you can't go. That's why the astronauts, they're tethered, but they can't fucking go anywhere unless they have something to push against. Otherwise, they're just floating in space. You can't go anywhere in the studio until you have something to push against. We spend our lives pushing against things. I spent my first 17 years pushing against my parents. I didn't know why I was pushing against my parents, but that's the role that parents serve. They become the thing that children push against in order to
push
pull.
It's the other, right? You push, but then you can pull it with you too. That's simple. Talk about Jewel Walker, because unfortunately he's not with us anymore, but he was so influential in the life of many people, and a lot of people don't know him, so it'd be great if you could speak to him. Also, festival in La Crosse, Wisconsin, he and I were on a sandbar in the middle of the Mississippi, and we were supporting. There's a photograph that I've seen presented in different places, and they say there were people on our shoulder, and there's a pyramid, and Jewel Walker and Carlo Mazzoni Clemente and myself were the base. And people have, and then there was somebody on top of us and a woman at the very top during one of these afternoon picnics during the festival. And people always say, well, they always can't identify who's at the bottom. Anyway, talk to us about Jewel Walker, because his position in that pyramid is very representative of what he was for a lot of people as the foundation and the base.
And the same for Carlo, because Carlo was the founder of Del Arte.
Yeah, true. Right.
So, both of those individuals, and they knew each other quite well.
And I would add, if James is at the base, he was the founder for many of us students too.
Absolutely. Because James is rock solid. That's when I think about James, that's a human being who is rock solid. And if it's true in the physical world, it's probably also true in the metaphysical world. and those things go together. Jewel Walker was my introduction to paradox. He understood paradox. Paradox is an interesting thing because we immediately think of paradox as a contradiction, and contradiction and paradox have nothing to do with one another. Contradiction is where two things are fighting each other. Paradox is where those two things you would think need each other in order to actually exist. And Jewel Walker was a total enigma. He never answered any question about anything. He would look at you and give you a spark of an idea and then say, okay, what's next? Go, just go. And when James says, he walked into the studio and didn't say what the fuck, he walked into the studio to play is what he said. We don't have the courage to play. And now what my students puppet back to me is another thing that I say all the time. You're not on stage to solve the problem. You're on stage to play with the problem in front of other people. If you have the courage to play with the problem, not solve it. We think of the juggler. As soon as the juggler has solved the problem, they have caught the balls. Mm-hmm. If they're playing with the problem, we will watch all day long because they're playing with the problem. And that's what we want to see on stage. That's what we need to do when we walk into that empty studio. That's what we need to do in our lives. People are convinced that if they could only find a fucking answer, they would be okay. What they don't realize is that the questions that they're answering today are obsolete almost as soon as you've answered it, because that's the nature of the world. And so as soon as you think you know anything, you have to realize that all you know now is that you're not where you were before, but you have no fucking idea of what's coming at you. And the preparation is to be willing to play with the problem in front of other people. And Jewel Walker, I swear, would walk into class not having the slightest notion of exactly where we were going, but he always brought a toy with him, if you will. Sometimes the toy was a bucket. Sometimes the toy was an idea. But he would put the toy in the middle of the space, basically, and say, start playing with it. And you'd look around going, well, what do you want me to do with it? And that was exactly the point. He'd look at you and say, I have no idea what I want you to do with it. Blow me away. Which is also what Fred Kerchak used to say to me when Fred was directing me. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know Fred Kerchak, and if you've never interviewed Fred Kerchak for this show, I can't recommend somebody highly enough.
He's on my list. Yeah. I got him on my list. What, Daniel, there's something you said that sparked something in me. So you're saying the world is moving really fast, which it is. What the answer is now is not the answer in the next second. Where does physical theater, we'll call it physical theater or movement theater, or theater that is, vividly, works through time and space, where does that stand now? Like, you and I have been doing this for 50 years, Karen almost as long. And, we know what it was like in those decades past, but what's happening now? There's all the baggage of mime is a dirty word, clowning is a dirty word, misunderstanding, all that stuff that we know about. Well, where do you think what we do now stands in this fast moving world? Like, do we grab from the past to help us with now, or is everything obsolete? What's going on here, do you think?
There's also the aspect of now everything is wants to be permanent, and live theater is ephemeral. You do it in conjunction with the audience, but if you try to preserve it, then it becomes film or photography. But the physical theater and live theater is kind of rarefied.
It's elemental. It is elemental. What are elements? So I have a dear friend who said to me one day, anybody can take apart a radio and put it back together. It takes a certain someone who takes a radio apart and puts it back together and it works. It takes an artist to take a radio apart and put it back together as a functioning toaster. Because they use the same elements. When you start taking things apart, you look at the individual elements and you realize, well, they were just put together that way for that function. If I take these elements and put them together otherly, they will do an entirely different function. Our bodies and that sexuality, sensuality, physicality that we were just talking about, and our souls are elemental. There is nothing, you can't take those more apart.
Mm-hmm.
You get to the point of universal module, the same as the actual universal module, which is an atom.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the fucking atom isn't the universal module. The
Neutrinos and stuff.
the way the core of the atom has a what is it?
Nucleus.
The nucleus. Thank you. The nucleus of the atom is the universal module. You can't take things more apart. But this computer that we're talking on, as well as my body, as well as this umbrella, are made out of the same thing. The same universal module. They're all atoms put together different ways. We start, and which is why physical theater is such an important thing to teach young people if they want to be creative, any kind of creativity. That creativity comes from the understanding that you take things apart to see what they are made of, and then you put them back together in differently, but we're giving them something that cannot be taken apart. The body, you take that apart anymore, no go. It's the same with your soul. It's the same with performance.
You talk about Japan, maybe, because your sense of design is very acute, and I think the Japanese culture is so, wrapped in the sense of design and precision. Do you have any thoughts about that? How maybe Japan has influenced you, or some of the other places in the world?
It influenced me enormously.
Yeah,
we steal. Artists steal, and they steal like artists, but they pay attention to what they're looking at. So I moved to Tokyo because I was going to stay there for 6 months on a grant from the U.S. government. When World War II ended, they made reparations financial to Europe, and to Japan, they made reparations cultural exchange. And so there's the U.S. Japan Foundation, which sent me to.
What year would that have been?
That was 19, I think it was 85. Wow. 85 is when I was there. And so I'm in my apartment, which at the time cost some phenomenal sum, like $1,700 for a tiny little, this is 1985, and something is $1,700. I went, but they were paying for it. So it didn't make any difference to me. And I went to buy cups because there was nothing in this apartment. And I'm buying cups, and they're all packaged in packages of 5 or 3. And I'm going, what? In America, they sell 6 or they sell a dozen,
right,
or 4,
right.
But they don't sell 3 or 5.
No.
What is going on? There's and all of a sudden it goes back to the plumb line. My whole life was on this thing. They're calling this the truth. And I'm going, no, this is the truth. You're making me live here. And this is not okay. Why is everything asymmetric? And you start looking into the why, because this is not, they didn't just decide one day to do it that way. They did it that way because culturally, their foundation is not symmetric. Their foundation is asymmetric. And when just the simplicity between symmetric and asymmetric, you could write a whole play about, a physical play, and they did. And they've been using it for hundreds of years. And I went there to study no drama and sumo wrestling.
Wow.
Yeah.
You studied sumo wrestling?
I did. Not as a practitioner,
yeah.
but as because they would have slaughtered me.
Wow.
But I was very interested in what was going on under their feet, that they perform on a platform, and this platform is made of clay, and it seemed to me that they were connected underneath, that they didn't stop here. The ground, it was just a change of medium, that they went to solid and then into solid. Their foundation was actually there. So I wanted to study that. But I ended up studying tea ceremony, which and I actually am diplomaed in tea ceremony, which was very rare for men, because all of the students there that I encountered were female, except for David and me. David, the aforementioned David Murrah, who was living there with his wife, Nancy, who taught me self-hypnosis. The tea ceremony is entirely asymmetric. And as you're learning things that are asymmetric, I mean, just think about any dance class you've ever done. We do 3 to the left, and then we do 3 to the right, and then we do 3 to the left, and then we do 3 to the right. And that's just the way we learn. They don't do it that way. Everything is asymmetric. And all of a sudden you start realizing that everything around you is asymmetric, and it gets, I get infected by little things, and then it grows, the infection grows. And so if you think my work is articulate, it comes from mashing together Decreu's specificity and Japan's asymmetrics.
Yeah, but also you wouldn't, if you'd grown up with that, you wouldn't have been able to incorporate it as something different that would inspire you.
No, that's why traveling is so incredibly important for young people.
Oh, absolutely. Tell us about some of maybe you have a disaster story, maybe in terms of touring, like, or tell us about some, Japan is this one place that influenced you and enriched you. Is there any other place in the world where you've had an adventure, that positive or negative, that you'd like to tell us? Disaster stories are always great, So.
Well, the disaster stories start with United losing my chairs. So all of a sudden I get to a theater and the chairs that Timepiece is based on, I don't have the chairs. So the theater says, well, then use a different chair. And that's like saying to a surgeon, well, use a scissors, don't use a scalpel.
Right, exactly.
and the surgeon goes, that's not how it happens. So I remember getting to, Israel. I was performing at the Museum of Modern Art in Tel Aviv, and it was a brand new museum, and the floor was marble. The entire floor was marble. Everywhere in the museum is marble. They don't have a stage, and you couldn't walk across the marble without slipping.
Yeah, slippery.
Oh my God! But beyond what you could imagine, slippery. So I'm out there buying tennis shoes for walking on a stage.
You had to pivot the chair too, right? You had to pivot.
Oh my God, I had to put rubber bottoms on the chairs, and then I had to figure out where the handles of the chairs were.
Yeah.
But And I in Alexandria, Egypt, I was asked to perform at in the mansion of the American ambassador to Egypt, and so with 200 other ambassadors from other countries watching, and there was no stage, and so they built this thing in the backyard, which was they put tables together, basically a bunch of tables, and I can't, and I said to them, I can't. I mean, I can walk on it and it's stable, but it's so homogenous that I don't know what to do. And Mrs. Atherton was her name. It was Athertons were, he was the ambassador. Mrs. Atherton said, "Come with me." And she walks me into the living room of this mansion, this gorgeous mansion. She says, "Look at that." And she's pointing to the white rug that is basically carpeting the entire room. And she said, "If we pick that up and put it on the stage, would that work?" And I said, "Yeah, you would do that for me?" And she said, "Well, I can't do that, but I have people who will." The next thing I know, I'm performing on a white carpet that is on top of these tables, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better than what it would have been.
Daniel, what is your relationship when you were performing? What was your relationship to the audience? Is when you performed your pieces, the pieces that you created, did you perform them to be directly connected to the audience, or was there essentially a fourth wall?
That's a very intelligent question.
I just saw an interview with you.
Let him answer the question.
Wait, this is part of it. I just want to say,
but
just a second, because I saw an interview with you on Way of the Clown, where the guy was interviewing you as a clown, which obviously there's not a lot of fourth walls in clown work. But this question that Karen asked is very, very good and very interesting. What's your take on that? You know,
first of all, I never perform. I only share. Because if you're performing, then people sit back and watch. And if you're sharing, people become involved in a much less binary world where they're the audience and I'm the performer.
Right.
We're in this together. So the very first thing I do once I'm on stage, so now you know what I do 2 minutes before, and the thought in my head right as I'm walking on stage. And then the first thing I do when I walk on stage is inhale the audience. Literally, I inhale them. And I learned this from a student of mine. I didn't know this. I was not that smart, but she taught me, you step in and you try inhaling. And it was like a new world, because all of a sudden they were in me. I took them in. Yeah. And hopefully it's interesting when you watch somebody inhale, you start inhaling. It's one of those mimetic actions that people are very responsive to. We are now breathing the same air. So this is, I'm not performing anything. I am sharing with them the trouvaille. Trouvaille is a French word that actually it's slang, but it's very much used. And it's two different verbs. It's trouver, which means to find, and travailler, which means to work. And a trouvaille is something that is found while you are working. And the things you find while you're working become the play. And then you rehearse the play so that you can navigate your way through those accidents again in a way that is fidèle. I can't think of the word in English. Faithful. Thank you.
Yeah.
That are faithful to what you thought should be the idea. And so the audience is there, hopefully discovering, as you're discovering, the accident every time you do it, that you never do it again. You can't walk in to a performance and do the show again, because that river has already blown by and you're stepping into a brand new river every time you do it. And the play that is happening is the play that you perform with all of the imperfections that happening has inherent in it. Shit happens. If it's again, you're actually trying to bring in an artifact that you have no control over.
Right.
If you're in there discovering, it's not even doing, it's discovering the play in front of, you're playing with the problem in front of the audience.
Yeah.
You're
the audience is a very important dynamic that you embrace and recognize and interact with on all different levels. Yeah, that makes total sense. Daniel.
Oh my goodness. I feel the heat.
It's hot in here. Hot in here.
Daniel, do you feel that?
Yes, the wind is.
Put it out in the corner. Daniel, it's that time for rapid fire.
Oh no. Okay, that's
rapid
hot.
Fire is a sequence where I'm going to throw out words to you. And just very, very quickly, with one word response or a gesture, whatever you want, you have to respond to this word association quickly, okay?
So in the moment.
You know, this speaking just a moment ago about the adventure of performance, this will be fun. This is the appropriate time to do that. So are you ready? He's ready. He's inhaling us.
And I'm inhaling you.
And he's self-hypnotizing.
I did my mini little thing.
Okay. First one. Spotlight.
Into it and hot.
Hands.
Pens?
Hands.
Hands. Oh. Bosom.
Eyes.
They absorb. They don't look out. They absorb.
Fourth wall.
Isn't there.
Sweat.
You earn the wrinkles on your brow by the sweat of your thought.
Child.
Oh, I love my daughter and son.
Elder.
I am.
And we'll talk about that a little later.
I didn't think I'd make it there.
Props.
Boss?
Props.
Props. Oh, physical and metaphysical.
Failure.
All the time. Get comfortable with it because it's your friend.
Critic.
Critic? Ugh, they don't exist. They're just, they don't know. Most of the time, they don't know what they're talking about.
Teacher.
Thank God.
Fame.
Never had it. Don't know.
Language.
Vocabularies. There's a hummingbird right behind the screen. You won't believe this. And now he's moved right over there. Do you see him?
Yeah, I see him.
Yeah. That's a happy accident.
Back. Come here. He was about a foot from me. He was right off.
Goodness.
He was right off the corner of the computer.
He almost went in your door there.
Yeah.
Velvet Sun. S-U-N. Velvet Sun.
Setting.
Mime.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Neon box.
I used to have a little neon cactus.
Future.
Long.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen, with Daniel Stein, rapid fire. That was wonderful.
Bravo, bravo. And a guest appearance by the hummingbird. That's amazing.
And a guest appearance by the hummingbird. Well, we have a here, and
it's one of your relatives, maybe. I don't know, so.
Well, you know that this is the vestige of my last incarnation. I was some kind of raptor, some kind of meat-eating
raptor.
Bird.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it brings to mind some of the profiles I've seen you on stage. You have this, there's this attack and this sense of energy. Okay, Daniel, let's talk about age. Like how does the older artist adapt? Not only when they're still performing, or what's the I don't want to say logical, but what's the process? How does one change? I like to think of aging as like an hourglass. And when we're younger, all the physicality is in the top, right? All the sand is here. And then you flip it over and it starts to, you flip it over and it starts to drain out. And the mental is on the bottom, and the mental fills up while the physical is draining. You still have the same volume. So I guess what I'm saying is that the physicality leaves, the mind becomes stronger. So what's your thought on the aging process? Considering your life and where you are now?
Hopefully one does it gracefully, because I identified myself through my body for so long, and it was I prided myself, inappropriately so, not to the point of narcissism, I hope, but inappropriately so. I identified as my body, and now I'm going to tell you something that you perhaps don't know, and I'm sure your viewers don't know, that I have physical limits. I have muscular dystrophy that I found out that I had when I was 20 years old, and it is winning a war against me, my physical envelope, if you will, that I can now put my fingers around my wrist. I'm sure you cannot. Your fingers aren't long enough to go around your wrist, can they?
Oh yeah, I have long fingers.
I've long fingers too. Yeah. But that's a loss of.
But I'm shrinking. All of the muscle is shrinking. Yeah. So I no longer have any of either the shape or strength that I used to have. And that's where coming into it gracefully becomes, because now I need to identify myself. I still, I don't want anybody else to identify me. I want to be the author of my life. I don't want other people to be the author of my life. And that identification, 20 years ago, had you said to me, you can never perform again, I would have been devastated. Today, if you said to me, you can never teach again, I would be devastated. I enjoy teaching, I think, as much, if not more, than performing, because I tell the students that I am simply the guy with the flashlight, that I don't know any more than they do, but I was hired because I have a very good flashlight. And today we're going to look at this. We're going to look at these two lines. And the first thing we notice is that they're perpendicular.
Wait a minute. You carry that flashlight around with you, or were you prepared? Was that prop prepared for this moment? What?
Useful prop.
Flashlight is on a holster that is always.
Look at
so
that.
interesting.
You cut it off.
In my pocket. Yeah, think about it. Think about it. I work in the theater. I work in a black space. I am constantly looking for the light. And if it's true in the physical world, it's probably also true in the metaphysical world. I am always looking for the light. And if I can carry my own light, perhaps someday I will be able to carry my own light.
Mm.
And so I'm trying in my older years. I mean, I've been carrying a flashlight 40 years. Really, I've gone through different flashlights. This is my newest iteration.
Yeah,
but,
LEDs are helpful, right?
oh my God.
Yeah.
And rechargeable. This is USB rechargeable.
Right.
Daniel, it sounds like your sort of solution is to redefine yourself. You think of yourself, and when you're younger, you're this an energetic performer that's touring and going all sorts of places, and then you come to this conclusion you're going to transition to something else. You change your definition, but you don't give up your ability to define yourself.
I never give up your ability to define yourself, because because then you're no longer the author. And I'm not. My father came back from the Second World War and decided he would never work for anyone ever again. And he told me that. He said, I am never going to work for anyone. I will work for myself. I'm not exactly sure what I will do, but I will not work for someone else. And I grew up with that mentality. And here, and this, hopefully it was the same when James was here at the university that I'm at right now. I don't work for people. They opened the door to me and said, create the curriculum, dude. Just do what you want. Mm-hmm. And nobody ever tells me, well, you should be. No, because I'd look at them and say, I don't need to work. I did that with my Apple stock. I took care of myself because from a very little time, but it's the truth. From a very little time, I knew I was never going to make money being an artist, or I thought I wasn't. But when I did start making money, I started investing. My bar mitzvah money went into stock. It did. My father was he never graduated high school, neither did I. And he...
Wait a minute, you never graduated from high school? You got a off...
Carnegie Mellon invited me. So I did the summer, my junior year of high school at Carnegie Mellon, where I
Wow, okay.
2 weeks into this 6 weeks program, Baker Salisbury, who was the director of the program at the time, says to me, Daniel, ideally, where will you be in the fall? And I said, Baker, ideally in the fall, I would be here as a full-time student. He said, let's make that happen. And I called my parents and said, they just invited me to Carnegie Mellon next year. And my father, of course, said, Daniel, you haven't finished high school. And I said, he didn't ask me if I finished high school. He asked me, ideally, where would I be in the fall? Fast forward to the fall, I'm in my first hour class with Jewel Walker, with 45 other people, because all of the actors, directors, and production people, lighting designers and costume designers, were all doing dynamics every morning for an hour with Jewel. And so the first day of school, I go to the registrar, and she looks at me and says, I don't have transcripts and I don't have your SATs. And I said, I know about the SATs. I never took that test, so you won't get those. And transcripts, I don't know if they give transcripts to people who haven't finished high school. The person you need to talk to is Baker Salisbury. I'm going to go to class and you talk with Baker. And I walked out of the room and I started taking my classes. 2 weeks into classes, Baker Salisbury walks into my first hour class saying, Daniel, you didn't tell me you didn't finish high school. And I said, Baker, you didn't ask me if I had finished high school. You asked me, ideally, where would I be in the fall? I'm here. You're interrupting 44 other people, and we can't have this conversation right now, and I'm not leaving this class. So catch me when I have a moment. And he never brought it up again. But then I never finished. So because I went off to Paris to study with the crew for 1 year and ended up staying for 20. So my father finished high school. I didn't finish high school. But my father at the dinner table used to talk about the retail business because it was his business. And so I understood that you have to buy something at a price and sell it for a bigger price. and I started to understand the stock market. And I started in stocks when I was 13 years old.
Daniel, where does a young person go today? Like, times have changed. For example, you're explaining how you got into Carnegie Mellon without the high school diploma. I just have a bachelor's from Humboldt State Universities, and I ended up teaching in MFA programs at UCSB, and nobody asked the question because my body of work was my resume and spoke for me. But it's different now. It's much more difficult, for a young person to, find their way through the system now, as a teacher or whatever. But what would you recommend for, like, what do you say to your students? Where do you go after UCSB or someone who hasn't even gone to college yet? Where would they go to study what we know, our body of work and so forth? To be an artist. Yeah.
The very first thing I tell them is don't ask questions you don't want answers to. We spend a lot of our time asking questions to people. Can I do this? Is it okay if whatever it is? And what we're basically looking for is a babysitter. We want someone to tell us what we're going to do is safe and okay. And will you hold my hand while we do this together? Because I'm too afraid to do this alone. So we ask a lot of questions that we really don't want the answer to, because if they say no, you're fucked. And if you simply take the initiative and don't, I could have said to Baker when he said, let's make that happen, oh, but can I do that without a high school diploma? It would have been fucked right there. My mind didn't go there. It went to, the dude is offering me a donut. I'm taking the donut. And we'll figure out what happens with the crumbs later. But right now, the dude is offering me a donut. Go for it. Yeah. And I spent my life doing that. And I tell my students, don't ask questions you don't want answers to. Stop looking for a fucking babysitter. Take responsibility for yourself. And where do you go as a next step? Look around and see what excites you. Don't be looking for a fucking piece of paper because it's not going to do you any good. Don't be looking for someone who you can follow, because ultimately they're going to walk off a cliff or they're going to die. Don't be looking for anything other than what are you passionate about? If students come out of any institution or any experience having discovered what they're really passionate about, they will have infinite energy to move in that direction. And somebody with infinite direction moving in a direction will get far.
So Daniel, you have,
that's beautiful, Daniel. Yes.
You have your energy is at the top of its life right now. So this idea of the aging artist and what happens next, your energy is stronger than ever. So
yes, it's very inspiring.
You've your life to this point has brought you to this magnificent fire within you, and I appreciate that a lot.
That fire only comes from the encounters like I had with you when we performed at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles. It comes from the people you interact with.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, that sense that the community is actually a huge part of why we do theater is the connections.
Yes.
You worry about legacy, or not worry, but do you think about legacy, or is that what's your feeling on that?
I think that's a word that if I ever pronounced should taste sour. I don't think people should be worried about their legacy. I think people should be working towards making a fucking difference.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of that gets taken care of by the people who either were listening or weren't listening, who either saw or didn't see, who either did or didn't do. But if you're thinking about your legacy, you're trying to dance on your fingertips instead of on your feet. And it's not useful. I know that I have students, and I know that I was a student. I still am a student. I'm a student of this umbrella. This morning, I couldn't make the thing here, and then I discovered that there's a way to make it go up and down, and it has nothing to do with up there. You'd think it would be way up there, and it's not. It's way down. It's way down here.
You got to bring that into the studio. You got to do a new piece of giving an interview with your computer at a table, and then the umbrella does stuff. You can make a
now make the umbrella do all the physical work now. That's just
Karen. Ask him the last question. Ask him the last question, Karen.
Daniel Stein, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I have lived the life of a prince, having not been born into princehood. And it is because of the generosity of my teachers. It was because certain people didn't give up on me when I had given up on myself. It was because my father, when he picked me up from jail, said, go to the car. I got in the car. He came out about 10 minutes later, sat down. I was 18 years old, sat down. I was expecting all hell, looked at me and said, so, how's that working for you? And I immediately fell into tears because I realized, probably for the first time, that he was on my side. I mentioned before that I had been pushing against my parents. I was not pushing against the right thing, but they taught me how to push. So when I grow up, I just want to go deeper in the direction I've been going, because for some reason, and I don't know who to owe this to or even what to call it, there has been an angel sitting on my shoulder my whole life that made me say things that I wasn't smart enough to say, that made me do things that I wasn't clever enough to do, that made me discover things that I was not insightful enough to see. And I just have been, two women have loved me enough to marry me. One for 21 years and now one for almost 26 years. I have led the life of a prince. When I grow up, I want to keep digging in the same hole.
Bravo.
That's so beautiful, Daniel. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you.
Yeah,
it's been wonderful seeing you. I want to know how Karen looks so goddamn young.
Mine. That's mine, does it?
I live a good life too.
Good.
Yeah, I have a lot of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlemen and other spirits of the world, this was Daniel Stein. It was a great interview, and we hope to see you for the next episode. Thanks, Daniel.
Take care, everybody.
Sunny Santa Barbara.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.